Prepare yourself for a thrilling spy detective tale unlike any other. What if the world's most brilliant detective found himself in a deadly game of cat and mouse, trapped in an unforgiving landscape, where danger lurks behind every shadow? What if a ruthless criminal as elusive as mist over the Alps was within reach, but only if Hercule Poirot could outsmart him in a race against time? Tonight you will embark on a suspenseful journey with the legendary Hercule Poirot in Agatha Christie's electrifying story, The Erymanthian Boar. But the question remains, will Poirot catch the criminal mastermind before it's too late, or will the ruthless Marrascaud slip through his fingers, vanishing like a ghost into the snow-covered abyss? Stay with us to find out. This masterful story is part of Agatha Christie's The Labors of Hercules collection, a series of detective tales inspired by the legendary feats of the Greek hero, Hercules. In this particular story, the mythical Erymanthian Boar, a wild and untamable beast that the great Hercules was tasked with capturing, finds its modern reflection in Marrascaud, a brutal shadowy figure whose very name spreads terror. But here, the battleground is not ancient Greece. It is the breathtaking yet perilous Swiss Alps, where isolation and mystery intertwine to create an atmosphere thick with tension and intrigue. Agatha Christie masterfully weaves classical mythology into the fabric of detective fiction, proving once again why she is the undisputed queen of mystery. Having completed his third labor in Switzerland, Hercule Poirot decided to take a brief respite, a chance to indulge in the beauty of the region. He wandered through the picturesque town of Chamonix, basking in its charm, before moving on to Montreux, where the serene lake mirrored the towering peaks above. But it was in Erymanthian that an uneasy feeling settled over him. The village, though quaint, was hemmed in by colossal snow-laden mountains, their icy peaks pressing down like silent sentinels. The air was crisp yet suffocating, and Poirot, ever sensitive to his surroundings, felt an inexplicable tightness in his chest. Impossible to remain here, he murmured, his sharp mind rejecting the oppressive stillness. Just then his keen eyes fell upon a funicular railway cutting through the frozen wilderness, leading upward toward the heavens. He made his decision instantly. He must ascend. The railway's route stretched to Les Avens, Carochet, and finally, Roches Naiges, staggering 10,000 feet above sea level. Poirot had no intention of reaching the summit. Les Avens, he reasoned, would be quite enough to satisfy his curiosity. But fate had other plans. As the funicular began its ascent, Poirot sat comfortably, his thoughts lost in quiet contemplation. Then, a subtle shift in the air. The conductor approached, taking Poirot's ticket with professional efficiency. But as he returned it, something else brushed against Poirot's palm, a small folded piece of paper. His sharp gaze flickered, but his expression remained unreadable. He waited, his fingers discreetly unfurling the message. The words, scrawled hastily in pencil, sent a thrill down his spine. Impossible to mistake those mustaches. I salute you, my dear colleague. If you are willing, you can be of great assistance to me. You have doubtless read of the affair Sad. The killer, Marrascaud, is believed to have a rendezvous with some members of his gang at Roches Naiges, of all places in the world. Poirot's lips curled into the barest hint of a smile. So the game was afoot. Marrascaud, a name that sent shivers through even the most hardened lawmen. A phantom, a spectre of crime, leaving behind nothing but blood and whispers. And now, fate had delivered him onto the same mountain path as Poirot himself. Poirot leaned back, his mind already racing ahead. He had set out to enjoy Switzerland's scenic beauty. Instead, he had been pulled into a deadly hunt amidst the icy peaks. Little did he know, the storm had only just begun. Of course the whole thing may be a plague, but our information is reliable. There is always someone who squeals, is there not? So keep your eyes open, my friend. Get in touch with Inspector Drouet, who is on the spot. He is a sound man, but he cannot pretend to the brilliance of Hercule Poirot. It is important, my friend, that Marrascaud should be taken, and taken alive. He is not a man, he is a wild boar, one of the most dangerous killers alive today. I did not risk speaking to you at Oldham, as I might have been observed, and you will have a freer hand, if you are thought to be a mere tourist. Good hunting. Your old friend, Erymanthian." Thoughtfully, Hercule Poirot caressed his mustaches. Yes indeed, impossible to mistake the mustaches of Hercule Poirot. Now what was all this? He had read in the papers the details of the affair Sally, the cold-blooded murder of a well-known Parisian bookmaker. The identity of the murderer was known. Marrascaud was a member of a well-known racecourse gang. He had been suspected of many other killings, but this time his guilt was proved up to the hilt. He had got away, out of France it was thought, and the police in every country in Europe were on the lookout for him. So Marrascaud was said to have a rendezvous at Roches-Niguez. Hercule Poirot shook his head slowly. He was puzzled, for Roches-Niguez was above the snow line. There was a hotel there, but it communicated with the world only by the funicular, standing as it did on a long narrow ledge overhanging the valley. The hotel opened in June, but there was seldom anyone there until July and August. It was a place ill supplied with entrances and exits. If a man were tracked there, he was caught in a trap. It seemed a fantastic place to choose as the rendezvous of a gang of criminals, and yet if Erymanthian said his information was reliable, then Erymanthian was probably right. Hercule Poirot respected the Swiss commissaire of police. He knew him as a sound and dependable man. Some reason unknown was bringing Marrascaud to this meeting place far above civilization. Hercule Poirot sighed. To hunt down a ruthless killer was not his idea of a pleasant holiday. Brain work from an armchair, he reflected, was more in his line. Not to ensnare a wild boar upon a mountainside. A wild boar, that was the term Erymanthian had used. It was certainly an odd coincidence, he murmured to himself, the fourth labor of Hercules. The Erymanthian Boar. Quietly, without ostentation, he took careful stock of his fellow passengers. On the seat opposite him was an American tourist. The pattern of his clothes, of his overcoat, the grip he carried, down to his hopeful friendliness, and his naive absorption in the scenery, even the guidebook in his hand, all gave him away and proclaimed him a small-town American seeing Europe for the first time. In another minute or two, Poirot judged, he would break into speech. His wistful dog-like expression could not be mistaken. On the other side of the carriage, a tall, rather distinguished-looking man, with greyish hair and a big curved nose, was reading a German book. He had the strong mobile fingers of a musician or a surgeon. Farther away still were three men, all of the same type, men with bowed legs, and an indescribable suggestion of horsiness about them. They were playing cards. Presently, perhaps, they would suggest a stranger cutting in on the game. At first the stranger would win. Afterwards, the luck would run the other way. Nothing very unusual about the three men. The only thing that was unusual was the place where they were. One might have seen them in any train, on the way to a race meeting, or on an unimportant liner. But in an almost empty funicular, no, there was one other occupant of the carriage. A woman. She was tall and dark. It was a beautiful face. A face that might have expressed a whole gamut of emotion, but which instead was frozen into a strange inexpressiveness. She looked at no one, staring out at the valley below. Presently, as Poirot had expected, the American began to talk. His name, he said, was Schwartz. It was his first visit to Europe. The scenery, he said, was just grand. He'd been very deeply impressed by the castle of Chillon. He didn't think much of Paris as a city, overrated. He'd been to the Folies Bergères, and the Louvre and Notre Dame, and he'd noticed that none of these restaurants and cafes could play hot jazz properly. The Champs-Élysées, he thought, was pretty good, and he liked the fountains especially when they were floodlit. Nobody got out at Les Avines, or at Carochet. It was clear that everyone in the funicular was going up to Roches-Niguez. Mr. Schwartz explained his own reasons. He had always wished, he said, to be high up among snow mountains. 10,000 feet was pretty good. He'd heard that you couldn't boil an egg properly when you were as high up as that. In the innocent friendliness of his heart, Mr. Schwartz endeavored to draw the tall grey-haired man on the other side of the carriage into the conversation, but the latter merely stared at him coldly over his pince-nez, and returned to the perusal of his book. Mr. Schwartz then offered to exchange places with the dark lady. She would get a better view. he explained. It was doubtful whether she understood English. Anyway, she merely shook her head and shrank closer into the fur collar of her coat. Mr. Schwartz murmured to Poirot, "Seems kind of wrong to see a woman traveling about alone, with no one to see to things for her. A woman needs a lot of looking after when she's traveling." Remembering certain American women he had met on the continent, Hercule Poirot agreed. Mr. Schwartz sighed. He found the world unfriendly, and surely, his brown eyes said expressively, there's no harm in a little friendliness all round. To be received by a hotel manager correctly garbed in frock coat and patent leather shoes seemed somehow ludicrous in this out-of-the-world, or rather above-the-world, spot. The manager was a big handsome man, with an important manner. He was very apologetic. So early in the season, the hot water system was out of order. Things were hardly in running order. Naturally, he would do everything he could. Not a full staff yet. He was quite confused by the unexpected number of visitors. It all came rolling out with professional urbanity, and yet it seemed to Poirot that behind the urbane facade, he caught a glimpse of some poignant anxiety. This man, for all his easy manner, was not at ease. He was worried about something. Lunch was served in a long room overlooking the valley far below. The solitary waiter, addressed as Gustave, was skillful and adroit. He darted here and there, advising on the menu, whipping out his wine list. The three horsey men sat at a table together. They laughed and talked in French, their voices rising. "Good old Joseph. What about the little Denise, mon vieux? Do you remember that sacré pig of a horse that let us all down at Oto?" It was all very hearty, very much in character, and incongruously out of place. The woman with the beautiful face sat alone at a table in the corner. She looked at no one. Afterwards, as Poirot was sitting in the lounge, the manager came to him and was confidential. "Monsieur must not judge the hotel too hardly. It was out of the season. No one came here till the end of July. That lady, Monsieur had noticed her perhaps. She came at this time every year. Her husband had been killed climbing 3 years ago. It was very sad. They had been very devoted. She came here always before the season commenced, so as to be quiet. It was a sacred pilgrimage. The elderly gentleman was a famous doctor, Dr. Karl Lutz from Vienna. He had come here, so he said, for quiet and repose. "It is peaceful, yes," agreed Hercule Poirot, "and yes, monsieurs there." He indicated the three horsey men. "Do they also seek repose, do you think?" The manager shrugged his shoulders. Again there appeared in his eyes that worried look. He said vaguely, "The tourists, they wish always a new experience. The altitude, that alone is a new sensation." It was not, Poirot thought, a very pleasant sensation. He was conscious of his own rapidly beating heart. The lines of a nursery rhyme ran idiotically through his mind. Up above the world so high, like a tea tray in the sky. Schwartz came into the lounge. His eyes brightened when he saw Poirot. He came over to him at once. "I've been talking to that doctor. He speaks English after a fashion. He's a Jew, been turned out of Austria by the Nazis. I guess those people are just crazy." This Dr. Lutz was quite a big man, I gather. Nerve specialist, psychoanalysis, that kind of stuff. His eyes went to where the tall woman was looking out of a window at remorseless mountains. He lowered his voice. "I got her name from the waiter. She's a Madame Grandier. Her husband was killed climbing. That's why she comes here. I sort of feel, don't you, that we ought to do something about it. Try to take her out of herself." Hercule Poirot said, "If I were you, I should not attempt it." But the friendliness of Mr. Schwartz was indefatigable. Poirot saw him make his overtures, saw the remorseless way in which they were rebuffed. The two stood together for a minute silhouetted against the light. The woman was taller than Schwartz. Her head was thrown back, and her expression was cold and forbidding. He did not hear what she said, but Schwartz came back looking crestfallen. "Nothing doing," he said. He added wistfully, "Seems to me that as we're all human beings together, there's no reason we shouldn't be friendly to one another. Don't you agree, mister? You know I don't know your name." "My name," said Poirot's Poiret. He added, I am a silk merchant from Lyons. I'd like to give you my card and Poirot, and if ever you come to Fountain Springs you'll be sure of a welcome." Poirot accepted the card, clapped his hand to his own pocket, murmured, "Alas, I have not a card on me at the moment." That night, when he went to bed, Poirot read through Lemonteau's letter carefully before replacing it, neatly folded, in his wallet. As he got into bed he said to himself, "It is curious. I wonder if Gustave the waiter brought Hercule Poirot his breakfast of coffee and rolls. He was apologetic over the coffee. Monsieur comprehends, does he not, that at this altitude it is impossible to have the coffee really hot. Lamentably, it boils too soon." Poirot murmured, "One must accept these vagaries of natures with fortitude." Gustave murmured, "Monsieur is a philosopher." He went to the door, but instead of leaving the room, he took one quick look outside, then shut the door again, and returned to the bedside. He said, "Monsieur Poirot, I am Drouet, Inspector of Police." "Ah," said Poirot, "I had already suspected as much." Drouet lowered his voice. "Poirot, something very grave has occurred. There has been an accident to the funicular." "An accident?" Poirot sat up. "What kind of an accident?" "Nobody has been injured. It happened in the night. It was occasioned perhaps by natural causes, a small avalanche that swept down boulders and rocks. But it is possible that there was human agency at work. One does not know. In any case, the result is that it will take many days to repair, and that in the meantime we are cut off up here. So early in the season, when the snow is still heavy, it is impossible to communicate with the valley below." Hercule Poirot sat up in bed. He said softly, "That is very interesting." The inspector nodded. "Yes," he said, "it shows that our commissaire's information was correct. Marrascaud has a rendezvous here, and he has made sure that that rendezvous shall not be interrupted." Hercule Poirot cried impatiently, "But it is fantastic." "I agree." Inspector Drouet threw up his hands. "It does not make the common sense, but there it is. This Marrascaud, you know, is a fantastic creature." "Myself," he nodded. "I think he is mad." Poirot said, "A madman and a mad." Drouet said dryly, "It is not amusing, I agree." Poirot said slowly, "But if he has a rendezvous here, on this ledge of snow high above the world, then it also follows that Marrascaud himself is here already, since communications are now cut." Drouet said quietly, "I know." Both men were silent for a minute or two. Then Poirot asked, "Dr. Lurks, can he be Marrascaud?" Drouet shook his head. "I do not think so. There is a real Dr. Lurks. I have seen his pictures in the papers. A distinguished and well-known man. This man resembles these photographs closely." Poirot murmured, "If Marrascaud is an artist in disguise, he might play the part successfully." "Yes, but is he? I never heard of him as an expert in disguise. He has not the guile and cunning of the serpent. He is a wild boar, ferocious, terrible, who charges in blind fury." Poirot said, "All the same." Drouet agreed quickly, "Ah yes, he is a fugitive from justice, therefore he is forced to dissemble, so he may, in fact he must be, more or less disguised. You have his description." The other shrugged his shoulders. "Roughly only. The official Bertillon photograph and measurements were to have been sent up to me today. I know only that he is a man of 30-odd, of a little over medium height, and of dark complexion. No distinguishing marks." Poirot shrugged his shoulders. "That could apply to anybody. What about the American, Schwartz?" "I was going to ask you that. You have spoken with him, and you have lived, I think, much with the English and the Americans. To a casual glance, he appears to be the normal traveling American. His passport is in order. It is perhaps strange that he should elect to come here, but Americans when traveling are quite incalculable. What do you think yourself?" Hercule Poirot shook his head in perplexity. He said, "On the surface, at any rate, he appears to be a harmless, slightly over-friendly man. He might be a bore, but it seems difficult to regard him as a danger." He went on, "But there are 3 more visitors here." The inspector nodded, his face suddenly eager. "Yes, and they are the type we are looking for. I'll take my oath on you, Poirot, that those 3 men are at any rate members of Marrascaud's gang. They're race-course toughs if I ever saw them. And one of the three may be Marrascaud himself. Hercule Poirot reflected. He recalled the three faces. One was a broad face with overhanging brows and a fat jowl. A hoggish bestial face. One was lean and thin, with a sharp narrow face and cold eyes. The third man was a pasty-faced fellow with a slight dandiacal air. Yes, one of the three might well be Marrascaud, but if so, the question came insistently, why? Why should Marrascaud and two members of his gang journey together and ascend into a rat trap on a mountainside? A meeting surely could be arranged in safer and less fantastic surroundings, in a cafe, in a railway station, in a crowded cinema, in a public park, somewhere where there were exits in plenty, not here far above the world in a wilderness of snow. Something of this he tried to convey to Inspector Drouet, and the latter agreed readily enough. But yes, it is fantastic. It does not make sense. If it is a rendezvous, why do they travel together? No indeed, it does not make sense, Drouet said, his face worried. In that case we have to examine a second supposition. These three men are members of Marrascaud's gang, and they have come here to meet Marrascaud himself. Who then is Marrascaud? Poirot asked. What about the staff of the hotel? Drouet shrugged his shoulders. There is no staff to speak of. There is an old woman who cooks. There is her old husband Jack. They have been here for 50 years, I should think. There is the waiter whose place I have taken. That is all. Poirot said. The manager, he knows of course who you are. Ooh. Naturally, it needed his cooperation. Has it struck you, said Hercule Poirot, that he looks worried? The remark seemed to strike Drouet. He said thoughtfully, yes, that is true. It may be that it is merely the anxiety of being involved in police proceedings, but you think it may be more than that. You think that he may know something. It occurred to me, that is all, Drouet said somberly. I wonder. He paused and then went on. Could one get it out of him, do you think? Poirot shook his head doubtfully. He said, it would be better, I think, not to let him know of our suspicions. Keep your eye on him, that is all. Drouet nodded. He turned towards the door. You've no suggestions, Poirot? I know your reputation. We have heard of you in this country of ours. Poirot said perplexedly, for the moment I can suggest nothing. It is the reason which escapes me, the reason for a rendezvous in this place. In fact, the reason for a rendezvous at all? Money, said Drouet succinctly. He was robbed then, as well as murdered, this poor fellow Sally. Yes, he had a very large sum of money on him which has disappeared. And the rendezvous is for the purpose of sharing out, you think? It is the most obvious idea. Poirot shook his head in a dissatisfied manner. Yes, but why here? He went on slowly. The worst place possible for a rendezvous of criminals. But it is a place this, where one might come to meet a woman. Drouet took a step forward eagerly. He said excitedly. You think? I think, said Poirot, that Madame Grandier is a very beautiful woman. I think that anyone might well mount 10,000 feet for her sake. That is, if she had suggested such a thing. You know, said Drouet, that's interesting. I never thought of her in connection with the case. After all, she's been to this place several years running. Poirot said gently. Yes, and therefore her presence would not cause comment. It would be a reason, would it not, why Rochers Niges should have been the spot selected. Drouet said excitedly. You've had an idea, Poirot. I'll look into that angle. The day passed without incident. Fortunately the hotel was well provisioned. The manager explained that there need be no anxiety. Supplies were assured. Hercule Poirot endeavored to get into conversation with Dr. Karl Lutz and was rebuffed. The doctor intimated plainly that psychology was his professional preoccupation, and that he was not going to discuss it with amateurs. He sat in a corner reading a large German tome on the subconscious and making copious notes and annotations. Hercule Poirot went outside and wandered aimlessly round to the kitchen premises. There he entered into conversation with the old man Jack, who was surly and suspicious. His wife, the cook, was more forthcoming. Fortunately, she explained to Poirot, there was a large reserve of tinned food, but she herself thought little of food in tins. It was wickedly expensive, and what nourishment could there be in it? The good God had never intended people to live out of tins. The conversation came round to the subject of the hotel staff. Early in July the chambermaids and the extra waiters arrived, but for the next 3 weeks, there would be nobody, or next to nobody. Mostly people who came up and had lunch and then went back again. She and Jack and one waiter could manage that easily. Poirot asked, "There was already a waiter here before Gustave came, was there not?" "But yes indeed, a poor kind of a waiter, no skill, no experience, no class at all." "How long was he here before Gustave placed him?" "A few days only, the inside of a week. Naturally he was dismissed. We were not surprised, it was bound to come." Poirot murmured. He did not complain unduly. "Ah no, he went quietly enough. After all, what could he expect? This is a hotel of good class. One must have proper service here." Poirot nodded. He asked, "Where did he go?" "That Robert, you mean?" She shrugged her shoulders. "Doubtless back to the obscure café he came from. He went down in the funicular." She looked at him curiously. "Naturally, monsieur. What other way is there to go?" Poirot asked. "Did anyone see him go?" They both stared at him. Do you think it likely that one goes to see off an animal like that? That one gives him the grand farewell? One has one's own affairs to occupy." "Precisely," said Hercule Poirot. He walked slowly away, staring up as he did so at the building above him. A large hotel, with only one wing open at present. In the other wings were many rooms, closed and shuttered where no one was likely to enter. He came round the corner of the hotel, and nearly ran into one of the 3 card-playing men. It was the one with the pasty face and pale eyes. The eyes looked at Poirot without expression, only the lips curled back a little, showing the teeth. Like a vicious horse, Poirot passed him and went on. There was a figure ahead of him, the tall, graceful figure of Madame Grandier. He hastened his pace a little, and caught her up. He said, "This accident to the funicular. It is distressing." "I hope, madam, that it has not inconvenienced you," she said. "It is a matter of indifference to me." Her voice was very deep, a full contralto. She did not look at Poirot. She swerved aside and went into the hotel by a small side door. Hercule Poirot went to bed early. He was awakened some time after midday. Someone was fumbling with the lock of the door. He sat up, putting on the lock. At the same moment the lock yielded to manipulation, and the door swung open. 3 men stood there, the 3 card-playing men. They were, Poirot thought, slightly drunk. Their faces were foolish, and yet malevolent. He saw the gleam of a razor blade. The big thick-set man advanced. He spoke in a growling voice, sacred pig of a detective. But he burst into a torrent of profanity. The 3 of them advanced purposefully on the defenseless man in the bed. "We'll carve him up, boys. Little horses. We'll slash Monsieur Detective's face open for him. He won't be the first one tonight." They came on steady, purposeful. The razor blades flashed, and then, startling in its crisp transatlantic tones, a voice said, "Stick 'em up." They swerved round. Schwartz, dressed in a peculiarly vivid set of striped pajamas, stood in the doorway. In his hand he held an automatic. "Stick 'em up, guys. I'm pretty good at shooting." He pressed the trigger, and a bullet sang past the big man's ear, and buried itself in the woodwork of the Pairs of hands were raised rapidly. Schwartz said, "Can I trouble you, Mem Poirier?" Hercule Poirot was out of bed in a flash. He collected the gleaming weapons and passed his hands over the 3 men's bodies to make sure they were not armed. Schwartz said, "Now then, march. There's a big cupboard just along the corridor. No window in it, just the thing." He marched them into it and turned the key on them. He swung round to Poirot, his voice breaking with pleasurable emotion. "If that doesn't just show, do you know, Mem Poirier, there were folks in Fountain Springs who laughed at me because I said I was going to take a gun abroad with me. 'Where do you think you're going?' they asked. 'Into the jungle.' Well, sir, I'd say the laugh is with me. Did you ever see such an ugly bunch of toughs?" Poirot said, "My dear Mr. Schwartz, you appeared in the nick of time. It might have been a drama on the stage. I am very much in your debt. That's nothing. Where do we go from here? We ought to turn these boys over to the police, and that's just what we can't do. It's a knotty problem. Maybe we'd better consult the manager, Hercule Poirot said. Ah, the manager. I think first we will consult the waiter, Gustave, alias Inspector Drouet. But yes, the waiter Gustave is really a detective. Schwartz stared at him. So that's why they did it. That is why who did what. This bunch of crooks got to you second on the list. They'd already carved up Gustave. What? Come with me. The doc's busy on him now. Drouet's room was a small one on the top floor. Dr. Lutz, in a dressing gown, was busy bandaging the injured man's face. He turned his head as they entered. Ah, it is you, Mr. Schwartz. A nasty business this. What butchers, what inhuman monsters. Drouet lay still, moaning faintly. Schwartz asked, is he in danger? He will not die if that is what you mean. But he must not speak. There must be no excitement. I have dressed the wounds. There will be no risk of septicemia. The three men left the room together. Schwartz said to Poirot, did you say Gustave was a police officer? Hercule Poirot nodded. But what was he doing up at Rocher's Naz? He was engaged in tracking down a very dangerous criminal. In a few words Poirot explained the situation. Dr. Lutz said, Marrascaud, I read about the case in the paper. I should much like to meet that man. There is some deep abnormality there. I should like to know the particulars of his childhood. For myself, said Hercule Poirot, I should like to know exactly where he is at this minute. Schwartz said, isn't he one of the three we locked in the cupboard? Poirot said in a dissatisfied voice. It is possible, yes, but me. I am not sure. I have an idea. He broke off, staring down at the carpet. It was of a light buff color, and there were marks on it of a deep rusty brown. Hercule Poirot said, footsteps. Footsteps that have trodden, I think, in blood, and they lead from the unused wing of the hotel. Come, we must be quick. They followed him through a swing door and along a dim, dusty corridor. They turned the corner of it, still following the marks on the carpet until the tracks led them to a half-open doorway. Poirot pushed the door open and entered. He uttered a sharp, horrified exclamation. The room was a bedroom. The bed had been slept in, and there was a tray of food on the table. In the middle of the floor lay the body of a man. He was of just over middle height, and he had been attacked with savage and unbelievable ferocity. There were a dozen wounds on his arms and chest, and his head and face had been battered almost to a pulp. Schwartz gave a half-stifled exclamation, and turned away looking as though he might be sick. Dr. Lutz uttered a horrified exclamation in German. Schwartz said faintly, who is this guy? Does anyone know? I fancy, said Poirot, that he was known here as Robert, a rather unskillful waiter. Lutz had gone nearer, bending over the body. He pointed with a finger. There was a paper pinned to the dead man's breast. It had some words scrawled on it in ink. Marrascaud will kill no more, nor will he rob his friends. Schwartz ejaculated, Marrascaud. So this is Marrascaud. But what brought him up here to this out-of-the-way spot? And why do you say his name is Robert? Poirot said, he was here masquerading as a waiter, and by all accounts he was a very bad waiter, so bad that no one was surprised when he was given the sack. He left, presumably to return Andermatt, but nobody saw him go. Lutz said in his low rumbling voice, so, and what do you think happened? Poirot replied, I think we have here the explanation of a certain worried expression on the hotel manager's face. Marrascaud must have offered him a big bribe to allow him to remain hidden in the unused part of the hotel. He added thoughtfully, but the manager was not happy about it. Oh no, he was not happy at all, and Marrascaud continued to live in this unused wing with no one but the manager knowing about it. So it seemed it would be quite possible, you know, Dr. Lutz said. And why was he killed? And who killed him? Schwartz cried. That's easy. He was to share out the money with his gang. He didn't. He double-crossed them. He came here to this out-of-the-way place, to lie low for a while. He thought it was the last place in the world they'd ever think of. He was wrong. Somehow or other they got wise to it and followed him. He touched the dead body with the tip of his shoe, and they settled his account. Like this. Hercule Poirot murmured.
Yes, it was not quite the kind of rendezvous we thought.
Dr. Lutz said irritably, "These hows and whys may be very interesting, but I am concerned with our present position. Here we have a dead man, I have a sick man on my hands, and a limited amount of medical supplies, and we are cut off from the world. For how long?" Schwartz added, "And we've got 3 murderers locked in a cupboard. It's what I'd call kind of an interesting situation." Dr. Lutz said, "What do we do?" Poirot said. "First we get hold of the manager. He's not a criminal, that one. Only a man who was greedy for money. He is a coward too. He will do everything we tell him. My good friend Jack, or his wife, will perhaps provide some cord. Our 3 miscreants must be placed where we can guard them in safety until the day when help comes. I think that Mr. Schwartz's automatic will be effective in carrying out any plans we may make." Dr. Lutz said, "And what do I do?" "You, doctor," said Poirot gravely, "will do all you can for your patient. The rest of us will employ ceaseless vigilance, and wait. There is nothing else we can do." It was 3 days later that a little party of men appeared in front of the hotel, in the early hours of the morning. It was Hercule Poirot who opened the front door to them with a flourish. "Welcome, mon vieux." Monsieur Lemteuf, commissaire of police, seized Poirot by both hands. "Ah, my friend, with what emotion I greet you. What stupendous events, what emotions you have passed through, and we below our anxiety, our fears, knowing nothing, fearing everything. No wireless, no means of communication. To heliograph, that was indeed a stroke of genius on your part." No, Poirot endeavored to look modest. "After all, when the inventions of man fail, one falls back upon nature. There is always the sun in the sky." The little party filed into the hotel. Lemteuf said, "We are not expected." His smile was somewhat grim. Poirot smiled also. He said, "But no, it is believed that the funicular is not nearly repaired yet." Lemteuf said with emotion, "Ah, this is a great day. There is no doubt, you think. It is really Marrascaud. It is Marrascaud all right. Come with me." They went up the stairs. A door opened, and Schwartz came out in his dressing gown. He stared when he saw the men. "I heard voices," he explained. "Why, what's this?" Hercule Poirot said grandiloquently. "Help has come. Accompany us, monsieur. This is a great moment." He started up the next flight of stairs. Schwartz said, "Are you going up to Drouet? How is he, by the way?" Dr. Lutz reported him going well last night. They came to the door of Drouet's room. Poirot flung it open. He announced, "Here is your wild boar, gentlemen. Take him alive, and see to it that he does not cheat the guillotine." The man in the bed, his face still bandaged, started up, but the police officers had him by the arms before he could move. Schwartz cried bewildered, "But that's Gustave, the waiter, that's Inspector Drouet." "It is Gustave, yes, but it is not Drouet." Drouet was the first waiter, the waiter Robert, who was imprisoned in the unused part of the hotel, and whom Marrascaud killed the same night as the attack was made on me. Over breakfast, Poirot explained gently to the bewildered American, "You comprehend, there are certain things one knows quite certainly in the course of one's profession. One knows, for instance, the difference between a detective and a murderer. Gustave was no waiter, that I suspected at once, but equally he was not a policeman. I have dealt with policemen all my life, and I know. He could pass as a detective to an outsider, but not to a man who was a policeman himself, and so at once I was suspicious. That evening, I did not drink my coffee. I poured it away, and I was wise. Late that evening a man came into my room, came in with the easy confidence of one who knows that the man whose room he is searching is drugged. He looked through my affairs, and he found the letter in my wallet, where I had left it for him to find. The next morning, Gustave comes into my room with my coffee. He greets me by name, and acts his part with complete assurance, but he is anxious, horribly anxious, for somehow or other the police have got on his track. They have learnt where he is, and that is for him a terrible disaster. It upsets all his plans. He is caught up here like a rat in a trap. Schwartz said, "The damn fool thing was ever to come here." "Why did he?" Poirot said gravely. "It is not so foolish as you think. He had urgent need of a retired spot, away from the world, where he could meet a certain person, and where a certain happening could take place." "What person?" Dr. Lutz. "Dr. Lutz, is he a crook too?" "Dr. Lutz is really Dr. Lutz, but he is not a nerve specialist, not a psychoanalyst. He is a surgeon, my friend, a surgeon who specializes in facial surgery. That is why he was to meet Marrascaud here. He is poor now, turned out of his country. He was offered a huge fee to meet a man here, and change that man's appearance by means of his surgical skill. He may have guessed that that man was a criminal, but if so, he shut his eyes to the fact. Realize this, they dared not risk a nursing home in some foreign country. No, up here, where no one ever comes so early in the season, except for an odd visit. The managers is a man in need who can be bribed, was an ideal spot. But as I say, matters went wrong. Marrascaud was betrayed. The 3 men, his bodyguard, who were to meet him here and look after him, had not yet arrived, but Marrascaud acts at once. The police officer who is pretending to be a waiter is kidnapped, and Marrascaud takes his place. The gang arrange for the funicular to be wrecked. It is a matter of time. The following evening, Drouet is killed, and a paper is pinned on the dead body. It is hoped that by the time that communications are established with the world, Drouet's body may have been buried, as that of Marrascaud. Dr. Lutz performs his operation without delay, but one man must be silenced, Hercule Poirot, so the gang are sent to attack me. Thanks to you, my friend, Hercule. Poirot bowed gracefully to Schwartz, who said, "So you're really Hercule Poirot?" "Precisely, and you were never fooled by that body for a minute. You knew all along that it wasn't Marrascaud." "Certainly. Why didn't you say so?" Hercule Poirot's face was suddenly stern. "Because I wanted to be quite sure of handing the real Marrascaud over to the police," he murmured below his breath, "to capture alive the wild boar of Erymanthia."